Hi everyone, my name is Ruth Vasquez, and the theorist in which I received was Antonio Gramsci. He was born obviously in January 22nd, 1991, until his death on April 27th, 1937. Gramsci is and was known as the Italian Marxist philosopher and communist politician. He wrote on political theory, sociology, and linguistics. He attempted to break from the economic determinism of traditional Marxist thought. And though he is considered to be a key neo-Marxist, he was a founding member of a one-time leader of the Communist Party of Italy and was imprisoned by Benito Mussolini by the fascist regime. So let's get started. So Antonio Gramsci was born in a small island off the Italy coast. He was one in seven children. He was actually born in Sardinas in 1891. He grew up in poverty and amongst it with peasants and of the island, and his experience of the class difference between mainland Italians and Sardinians, and the negative treatment of peasants, Sardinians, by the mainlanders shaped his intellectual and political thought deeply. As I mentioned before, he was born in a small island off the coast of Italy. He actually left in 1911. He left the island to study at the University of Turin, in which he had received a scholarship because his family was one of the families that actually knew how to read and write in such impoverishment. Therefore, he received a scholarship and he landed in northern Italy, where the university is located, the University of Turin. He spent most of his time in Turin among socialist Sardinians immigrants who worked in the island, and workers recruited from poor regimes and to staff urban factories. It was this sort of atmosphere that welcomed Gramsci to the university life and affected his thinking for the rest of his life. While in college at Turin, Gramsci joined the Italian Socialist Party in late 1913, where he would later be one of the head members of this organization. While in college, well, actually after leaving it, but while in college, he did study Marxism and the thought of it, of leading roles. He founded a leftist group within the Socialist Party and founded the newspaper in May 1919, which was called the New Order. Gramsci encouraged development of factory council, democratic bodies, and elected directly by industrial workers, which undercutted the control of trade unions. The council participated in general strikes in Turin in 1920, in which Gramsci played a key role. So Gramsci ends up leaving the Socialist Party shortly before the rise of Benito Mussolini. In 1916, he became the co-editor to another newspaper, the Socialist, which actually made him the Socialist Party's official organ, like the main source. He articulated in prolific writing and political theory. Gramsci provided a formidable commander writing on the aspects of Turin's social and political life. During this time, he actually ends up leaving school. He actually still continued to write for the Socialist newspaper and rose to the ranks within the Socialist Party. He and Italian Socialists became affiliated with Vladimir Lenin and the International Communist Organization, known as the Third International. During this time, political activism, Gramsci advocated for workers' council labor strikes as method of taking control of the means of production, otherwise controlled by the wealthy capitalists and of labor classing. Ultimately, he helped found the Italian Communist Party and mobilize workers for their rights. He became the head of the party in 1924. This is the Communist Party. He was elected to the Chamber of Deputies after his party was outlawed by Benito Mussolini. Gramsci was arrested and imprisoned on on the 9th of November 1926. The fascist police arrested Gramsci despite the parliamentary immunity and brought him to Roman prison. At the trial, the prosecutor actually argued that he quoted, "We must stop his brain from working for 20 years." In prison, despite the rigorous censorship, Gramsci carried out extraordinarily and wide-ranging historical and theological study of Italian society and possible strategies for change. While in prison, as I mentioned before, the prosecutor they placed him in prison because they wanted his mind to stop thinking, which actually backfired, because while he was in prison, he wrote what is now known as the prison notebooks, which is known as his best work. They were 32 notebooks containing almost 3,000 pages. These notebooks were smuggled out of his prison and published in Italy after the war, but they were not published in English until like the late 70s. The central guiding theme of the notebooks was to develop a new Marxist theory implicated by the conditions of advanced capitalism. Following in his theories in 1926 to 1937, while he was in prison, Gramsci's key intellectual contribution to Marxist theories is elaboration of social function and culture and its relationship to political and economic system. In his theory, Gramsci viewed the state as an instrument of domination that represents the interests of capital and the ruling class. He developed the concept of culture hegemony and explains how the state accomplishes this, arguing that domination is achieved in large parts by a dominant ideology expressed through social institutions and socialized people to consent to the role of dominant groups. He responds with the belief, dominant beliefs and critical thought of these barriers for this revolution. Gramsci ends up dying 3 years after being released from prison in Rome in 1937. He did experience various health conditions, and while in prison, he was never actually treated for various health conditions. So therefore, 3 years after his release, shortly after his release, he died from those illnesses. So now we're going to take a look at what he meant in his theories and what types of shapes in political, sociological, and socioeconomic levels actually implicate his theories in today's world. So we know that he's known as the Italian Marxist. Following from this, his prison notebooks were meant to actually question society. Were meant for society to question what is known as the status quo. For Gramsci, society was made up of relations of productions of capital and labor, which was actually similar to what Marx's argument was, that the state, political society, and the civil society all together, there was a gap of separation. So let's move on. Gramsci's political philosophy was basically on communism. He did argue that everybody should be fair and equal in this type of age, and that the sovereign should be the people. However, he also argued that society was and is dominated by the ruling class, no matter what type of government, especially in the capitalistic government. He mentions how he argues that society is ruled by the ruling class, and although we argue in the democracy that the sovereign here is the people, the question actually does arise if we really are the sovereign, and we will take a look why. He also argued that the ruling class tended to manipulate the culture through common sense, which is very, very funny in today's political age, because that's actually what we have been experiencing. And that manipulation of common sense is known as cultural hegemony. So cultural hegemony in human beings. Cultural hegemony is the Greek word for domination. The ruling class puts individuals in positions of power and influences hegemonic ideas and gains domination over the subject class, meaning so the 1% over like all of us. Human beings are easily influenced by common sense through the ruling class. Oh, usually this could be, it doesn't really have to be a ruling class. It could just be like the wisdom of law, local priest, or anybody we as society think is up there. Whatever they say, we tend not to question it. And that's one of the main things that Gramsci wanted us to question. He believed that if we were to question common sense or just like any type of ideal, then other aspects or keys would be able to be implemented into society, and therefore we would have a much more stabilized society. So then different conceptions are what makes common sense is views are taken for granted without any thought, and that's what he meant by humans, that we're easily manipulated, and therefore when things don't go in our favor, we tend to blame people, but realistically, we just don't tend to question. Gramsci mentions that his prison notebook of common sense was that individuals guide themselves on the immediate private concerns. So, and common sense prevents society from perceiving social and economic exploitation, meaning that since everybody in a capitalist society is in three different types of levels, we tend to not view the same type of common sense as others, and that's when a problem occurs. One of the examples I saw was us as individuals. We don't tend to question the fact that our front lawn always has to be green for society, because that's what our common sense lets us. And that was a very interesting fact in which he pointed out. Instead of questioning the status quo, we tend to embrace it, which is very bad, because we should be questioning the sense of common sense, because people tend to think without critical awareness and disjoint the episodic away. Finally, the issues in America. So Gramsci basically argues that due to all this type of common sense that we allow, we can reflect this kind of theory into today's political society. If society questioned the common sense to the ideas of the issues, then people would actually be the sovereign rather than vice versa. The cause of today's polarization is due to the domination of not the I made a mistake there, but not the working class, but of the ruling class, which would be our government. They tend to manipulate the way they want things to sound, which isn't the correct way, and yet we don't question it because we think it's a norm and it's ideal. If we were to keep a democratic society, we would have to start questioning the status quo. We will continue to make decisions without critical awareness, which may lead to limit of possibilities in democracy. And this was my presentation. Thanks, everybody.